It's easy for someone that hasn't lived through hyperinflation to dismiss Bitcoin and digital assets as this unnecessary thing that is questionable or I guess it's not just questionable, they don't understand who it's helping.
Yeah.
Right? Like most people writing those articles haven't tried to send money to someone in Venezuela. I would love to ask anyone that is writing these obituaries, because they do write these obituaries every so often, that what is your preferred way of sending money to Venezuela? Do you want to send it to a wire transfer that the person that you're sending to doesn't have a place to receive that wire because Venezuelan banks don't take US dollars? Or did you know that many Venezuelans just don't want to have a US dollar bank account in their local banks because they've been seized so many times?
Those were the words of the co-founder and chief strategy officer of a company called Ledn, spelled Ledn. They serve clients in 125 different countries. Another important aspect of the story, while their founders met in Canada, they're now a Cayman-based company. I invited him on here today to share his inspirational story that took him from Venezuela to Canada and why his experiences of an economic collapse in Venezuela should matter to each and every single one of us. And trust me, it's the kind of story that I really want to share on here. Because ultimately on this podcast, I love exploring how technology is addressing real-world problems, impacting lives and transforming businesses. So yes, Mauricio has a riveting origin story that saw him using Bitcoin to escape the economic collapse of Venezuela. He navigated through things like hyperinflation, financial corruption, and those experiences helped shape the approach to digital currency lending, most importantly of all, client protection. What I'm trying to say is this isn't just a topic about technology, but about social economic structures. And Mauricio is a proponent of safety, transparency and integrity in a space that has often been criticised for the lack of these virtues. So we've got a lot to talk about. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to Toronto, where Mauricio is waiting to join us today. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell everyone listening a little about who you are and what you do?
Hi, my name is Mauricio Di Bartolomeo. I'm the co-founder and chief strategy officer at Ledn. I am originally from Venezuela, which is where I learned what hyperinflation, inflation was and how money works or doesn't most often. And that is what led my family to Bitcoin during hyperinflation in 2015. And they got me into Bitcoin, which is a bit of a different path than most people take. So my brothers and my dad actually were mining before I was, and they got me into it. And once I saw how they were using it in Venezuela and the fact that they were able to use Bitcoin to protect their wealth when at the time they couldn't even use dollars or other instruments, they had a lifeline in Bitcoin. It wasn't just them. It was my friends, my cousins, my relatives, all of my loved ones basically started using Bitcoin. And when I saw what it did for them, I just wanted to be a part of this thing. And I did my absolute best to figure out how. And they started getting into the space through mining Bitcoin. And that's how I started. I started mining Bitcoin like them. They taught me how to buy the computer, how to connect it. I basically got up to speed. And once I started mining, I started generating Bitcoin. And once that happens, you want to buy more Bitcoin or want to hold more Bitcoin. That's the one thing in your mind. But the way to do that is to reinvest. And most often you have to reinvest the Bitcoin and you have to let go of it, which was a tremendously painful experience time and time again. And that is actually where Ledn comes from. Ledn, the business that we co-founded, Adam and I, was founded on the premise that we wanted to let people get liquidity in dollars without having to sell their Bitcoin. In the same way that you could take a home equity line of credit from your house without selling your house, and you get the liquidity you need and you still own your house, we wanted the same product for Bitcoin. And it didn't exist at the time. This was 2018. So that's what Adam and I decided to build. We put our heads together. We put together an amazing team. We raised some money and we issued Canada's first Bitcoin-backed loan in 2018. And it turns out that it wasn't just Canadians and miners that needed this product. It was all over the world. And today we service 130 countries, thousands of clients over 130 countries. We've issued over $600 million worth of these loans. We had the support of investors like Coinbase Ventures, Alexis Ohanian, White Star, Kingsway Capital, 10T, Dan Tapiero. So it's been an amazing journey so far. So that was a bit of a long intro, but that's a bit about me.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack there. We will have people listening all around the world. And I think your origin story is so important, and how Bitcoin played a critical role in your escape from Venezuela's economic collapse, and some of the challenges that Bitcoin helped you overcome. And your experience, of course, has influenced your perspective on cryptocurrencies too. So can you tell me a little bit more about that, your time in Venezuela, having lived through hyperinflation in Venezuela, and your key takeaways on how individuals can better protect their assets, and how you assist in this regard? Because it is a huge problem, not only in that part of the world, but increasingly in other parts of the world too. And so there will be some people listening blissfully unaware of what's happening out there. So can you expand on some of that origin story for me?
Yeah, happy to. So, yeah, inflation is something that many of us around the world have experienced since I can remember. So I grew up dancing to songs about inflation in Latin America. Like, it's part of our culture, right? Yeah. Like most songs talk about how your peso is worth nothing and the dollar's soaring to the moon and every day you can afford less things. And inflation is just a reality. It's a structural reality of everyday life in most of the world. Like I'll count the countries that don't think about inflation with my hands, right? Like, it'll be like 5 countries in Europe, whoever has the euro, Japan, Australia, the US, Canada. That's about it, right? Like the UK, I'll throw it in there. That was until COVID. When COVID came, all of a sudden the world learned that inflation is not just limited to developing countries. Developed countries can be wildly irresponsible with their finances as well. And they can print away and make terrible policy decisions that squeeze their constituents, as they are getting squeezed right now. And in the UK, I fear for your compatriots as winter approaches, because I can only imagine oil coming back at 100 and what your heating bill is going to look like. And that's going to put a tremendous squeeze on the population. It's already happening in Canada. It's happening all over the world. For me, inflation was always this thing that defied everything you learned. So my dad was an entrepreneur, and I wanted to be an entrepreneur from pretty early on. And in my mind, I still remember sitting at the kitchen table and listening to my dad talk about his businesses and money. And what dawned on me was that my dad was an entrepreneur. He dipped his hands in a lot of business. He had cyber cafes, shoe factories. He built real estate. He did import-export, had a cell phone stores across the country. So he was always just adapting to the situation. And it seems like he just had a pulse on the economy. And my sense from seeing him operate was that he understood money and money flows. And so my main takeaway from all of that was that if I wanted to make money, I should first understand how money works. And so I basically went on this quest as I was growing up to understand how money works. And I started reading economics books. I went to university for economics. And Venezuela would somehow always challenge what I would read in the books. So I'll give you an example. The books tell you that debt is bad. Economics tell you to do not take debt. That is a terrible thing. Don't get swamped in debt. That's going to squeeze you. And then I went back to Venezuela and I saw everybody that took debt just print money hand over fist. And I was baffled. And I was like, what? Is it because they're taking the wrong kind of debt? Is it because there's more than one type of debt? And then I realized, yes, there is asset-backed debt. And then there's unsecured debt. And guess what? Asset-backed debt is wonderful, because as the government prints and devalues your currency, your asset just gets repriced. So in essence, the value of your debt relative to the value of your asset improves as a ratio over time as inflation does its thing. So rich people love debt. They absolutely adore debt. It's just asset-backed debt and priced at a price at or below inflation. So not all debt is bad. And I had to relearn all of this. Why were people making money in Venezuela? Because they were borrowing from the banks at 20% and inflation was running at hundreds percent. Yeah. So naturally, you have a massive rate arbitrage. So debt can be mispriced. I learned that. The other thing I learned was that the books tell you, put away a little bit of your paycheck in fiat currency every month in the bank and watch it grow. Lies.
Yeah.
It does not grow. It does not grow at the same speed at which the money base or the money supply grows, meaning they are lying to you. They're telling you to put that thing away, and the bank is going to give you some basis points when they are printing 10% of the money base every year. So you're walking, and they're basically running on a Formula One car. And they expect you to keep up. So when I was basically unlearning all of these things, so that was the other thing. And then the biggest one was this false idea that the governments are like a business, that they collect money with taxes, and then with those revenues, they surgically plan their expenses for the year. And oopsie, we collect $1 million in taxes and we spent $999,999 because we're so precise because we are the government. Lies. If they run out of money, they print it. They actually print it out of thin air. And the taxes that they collect from you every year, if you look at economics books, they'll tell you they don't even talk about it as government revenue. They talk about it as wealth destruction. They are so irresponsible and disorganized that they don't even actually collect the taxes that you pay. They just print throughout the year as they need. And then at the end of the year, what comes in as taxes, they basically burn. Like they destroy. They basically net out with what they've already printed and spent. Think about it. You, a household, if you got a cash injection once a year and then you were told to plan your expenses for the entire year, a household of 5 people, could you do it? I would dare say no.
Yeah.
I would dare say nobody can. How do you expect the parents of 20 million people to plan this precisely? They do not. They say they do. Anyway, all this to say that I realized that I cannot easily trust money. Not just my money, any money. Like the Venezuelan money is a joke. It's an absolute joke. People have been laughing at it for eons. You wouldn't expect the Canadian dollar or the US dollar to be just as irresponsible. But right now, you see, there's many ways of tracking inflation. Inflation is the broad-based increase in prices of things. And if you ask the Federal Reserve, they have this basket of goods. And ironically, the goods that are in this basket change all the time because they adjust the damn components of the basket such that it arrives at the rate that they want it to arrive. They reverse engineer the rate they want to get to, and then they figure out the components. Okay, that's not how you calculate inflation. That's how you set the inflation rate that you want to tell the public, right? The real inflation rate, and I invite everybody to watch this, the best way to track inflation, my favorite one is the Big Mac Index that is run by The Economist. The Big Mac Index tracks the price of a Big Mac across the world. And the Big Mac is a wonderful barometer of inflation because it has a little bit of everything. Yeah. Right? It has a little bit of red, a little bit of beet, a little bit of vegetables, a little bit of wheat, a little bit of sauces. And the price of that thing, if you compare the price of a Big Mac in British pounds versus US dollars versus Colombian pesos versus Argentinian pesos, and then you basically take those ratios and look at how they compare to the ratio of exchanges between the currencies, you will very clearly see that many central banks are A, lying to you about the rate at which your money is appreciating, and B, lying to you about the value of your dollar vis-a-vis other currencies. So all of these things led me to understand that you cannot trust any centralized form of money. It's in the way that you cannot blindly trust it because you cannot verify it. You're not in there to make the decisions. They publish once a month. You have no idea how they're printing, when they're printing, who the money's going to. No clue. You're fully in the dark. Bitcoin is the complete opposite of that. Bitcoin is transparent. It runs on open source code. You, me, anyone can log into a computer and see exactly how many Bitcoin are moving around. What's changing hands, who has it, not by name, but by address. I know that no one's inflating away my money supply. I know that I have 1 out of 21 million Bitcoin, and I will always have 1 out of 21 million Bitcoin because no one can print the 21 million and 1 Bitcoin or the 21 million and 2 Bitcoin. You cannot print any additional Bitcoin. So that ensures that the value of my savings will not get diluted away by some corrupt cronies that want to print money to give to their friends. Wow, that was a really long tangent.
You've completely blown my mind now. I was certainly got me thinking about things differently, and I will be checking out that Big Mac index that you were talking about there. And of course, the lending crisis last year was a pivotal moment for many in the digital asset management space there. One of the things that put you on my radar was Ledn not only survived, but possibly came out even stronger. So can you tell me a bit more about that journey that you've been on? Because it actually worked out well for you guys, right?
Yeah, definitely. So this industry, as I mentioned, is open.
Yeah.
And permissionless, meaning that is the beauty of it. Everybody can participate. It does not restrict access to anyone from participating in it. And that is why a company like Ledn can service clients in 130 countries, because for the first time in history, there is a type of asset that a person in Colombia can place as collateral to a lender in Canada or the Cayman Islands. And we will take that asset as collateral and we will fund you the dollar funding or financing that you need. That's a phenomenal breakthrough in financial inclusion. And that happened, as Bitcoin became popularized in the rally of 2020, like in the wake of COVID, mostly. Now, as Bitcoin became more popular, as the prices of digital assets rose, many companies saw opportunity to come in and offer financial services to people that hold these assets. That's what we do. We let people take loans and get dollars instead of selling their Bitcoin. We allow people with dollar tokens or USDC to earn a great interest rate on their assets, and same with people that own Bitcoin. We weren't the only ones doing this. There were other companies that came into this space and started doing this. At Ledn, we are incredibly focused in the long-term success of this business and of our clients, and we do not take shortcuts. And this business and this asset class, because it's so new, has risks. These activities of lending, particularly around lending, have risk. And we've always been pretty upfront about it, and we've been pretty much incredibly systemic about identifying those risks and protecting against them. Other companies in the space were not as upfront with the risks and were not as responsible in addressing them. They would tell their clients that they were taking care of those risks, and they would tell their clients that their products were safe. But in the back, they were doing all sorts of financial shenanigans to enrich themselves through their own tokens, through basically gaming the price of their own tokens, through making loans to bad companies, to making loans that were supposed to stay out for 5 years when a client could come in and withdraw at any time. So, they were taking client money that deposited by the clients on the premise that they could be withdrawn at any time. And they took that money and they invested in multi-year payback projects. And lo and behold, when the clients came in and asked for their money back, they didn't have the liquidity to fulfill those withdrawals. So they had to basically shut the whole thing down and send companies into bankruptcy. That happened to over 12 lenders in the space in 2022. And it was for a plethora of reasons that were all pretty similar, actually. And Ledn was one of the only, if not the only lender that not only never paused withdrawals, continued operating normally and smoothly throughout 2022, but we didn't lose a cent or satoshi of client assets. And that was pretty unheard of in that wave of collapses. So what ended up happening is you had, they say a high tide floats all boats. And what happened in 2021, 2022 was that there was a massive high tide. And anybody with any kind of boat, could make things look great. But they were operating the business in sort of fantasy conditions, right? Like they were making projections that were basically not aligned with reality. And so we've always been pretty surgical when it comes to risk management. And that is what allowed us to navigate 2022 the way we did. And now, funny enough, we are going to these companies that the borrowers actually that are from these companies that went into bankruptcy are coming to us now, asking us to please refinance their loans out of the bankruptcy proceedings. And we're doing that. We're doing our best to help all these people that have all these assets trapped, because these bad actors a few years back just made so many promises they couldn't keep, and they defrauded a lot of people. So naturally, these people are now realizing that those groups weren't doing what they said they would, but there were a few that did. And so we're taking a lot of that volume. People still need loans. People still need to earn interest on their digital assets. This industry isn't going anywhere. So what we're seeing is actually a lot of the demand is consolidating around Ledn, now that we are the sort of premier place and the most trusted place to get these types of services.
And some of those examples you just offered there is one of the reasons why legacy media often loves to criticise the crypto industry for its Wild West nature. There's a sign about, I think it's the death of Bitcoin, and it reports every time a news publication will say something that crypto or Bitcoin's dead. They've been doing it in hundreds, if not thousands of articles since the early 2000s there. And what you're doing at Ledn, though, is you're emphasising something different: safety, transparency and integrity, especially in an environment where rapid wealth accumulation can sometimes take precedent. We've all been on those Telegram groups where they say when moon. I think slowly we're moving away from that. But can you tell me a little bit more about why you emphasise those areas and what you're doing differently?
It's easy for someone that hasn't lived through hyperinflation to dismiss Bitcoin and digital assets as this unnecessary thing that is questionable or I guess it's not just questionable. They don't understand who it's helping.
Yeah.
Right? Like most people writing those articles haven't tried to send money to someone in Venezuela. I would love to ask anyone that is writing these obituaries, because they do write these obituaries every so often, that, what is your preferred way of sending money to Venezuela? Do you want to send it to a wire transfer that the person that you're sending to doesn't have a place to receive that wire because Venezuelan banks don't take US dollars? Or did you know that many Venezuelans just don't want to have a US dollar bank account in their local banks because they've been seized so many times? Or that the Venezuelan people don't trust an authoritarian regime because most of the banking system is run and operated by the central government, by the dictator. So many people don't want to basically hold their wealth in the local banks because it basically gives all of that information to a very antagonistic regime. So how do you do that? You do PayPal, because PayPal sanctioned Venezuelans. You do, what do you do? Right? And to some, you might say, oh, well, why would I need to send money from Venezuela or to Venezuela? Well, man, there's 30 million people there. Yes, you may not know one of us, but we do. We need to live. We need to interact with the world the same way everyone else does.
Yeah. And
that holds true for Congo. And that holds true for the good people that are left in Russia, because not everyone in Russia is a bad person.
Yeah.
Say you're a good person in Russia and you're totally against the war and you want to get out of there. How do you get your money out? No bank will touch you.
Yeah.
What do you do? And are we just going to basically paint every single Russian as a horrible person with a big brush because we don't have the tech to figure it out? That's not how it works. Bitcoin is an incredibly important humanitarian tool. Having the right to opt out of a currency that is being weaponized against you should be a human right. If tomorrow the UK government started printing cash and funding all the things you don't agree with, Neil, and saying that, Neil, too bad, so sad, you can't trade your pounds for dollars or any other currency because you're doing this to basically damage the national interest of the UK.
Yeah.
And you are no longer able to buy things with your pounds that are not the things that we want you to buy. That's coming. Yeah. And they'll do that. And when you realize that, it'll dawn on you that Bitcoin is one of those things that you don't need it until it's the only thing you need. And
so it's so important that you bring up that subject there and the voice of people all around the world. Because as you said, people writing those articles in the West, in the US or in the UK or across Europe, they're not familiar with this story. They've not lived it. But I think once you do, then it's a very different story, isn't it?
It really is. And if you look around and you look at who writes these obituaries, most often that they're not. It's Western media for sure, because they've never needed something. They've never had a currency, a capital control. They've never been told, this is all the dollars you can buy, Neil. Hey, and this year you can only buy $200 US, Neil, and you got a $2,000 allowance if you want to go travel, because that's how we live. That's how most of the world lives. In fact, even Chinese people have limits on how many US dollars they can buy. China, the second world superpower, they can't just freely buy and sell dollars like people in the West do. So the people that are writing these obituaries are most often these. And then the odd instance where you see an article like this come out of the developing world, it comes most often from government-backed.
Yeah.
So of course the government has a vested interest in telling you to keep using their dumb currency, because the less people use it, the less valuable it becomes. The less valuable it becomes, the worse they look. The worse they look, they get voted out. It's all the chain to stay in power. And I don't want to sound like this massive conspiracy theorist. I'm not. I've never considered myself a conspiracy theorist. I've just saw so many of these things not be conspiracies and actually come and screw me up that I kind of learned to defend myself. And it's this natural sort of antibodies is Bitcoin is part of my antibodies. It's kind of how I think about it. And so don't be fooled by these people that don't understand money or have a vested incentive not to understand it or to make sure that you don't understand it. There was a horrible, if you want to see the degree to which people will go to lie to people and to keep people confused. The IMF just put out a video about what is inflation. It's a 5-minute long video. I recommend everybody go watch it just so you can see the level of manipulation that they're trying to enforce on people. It's a 5-minute video explaining what inflation is and where it comes from. They talk about the increase in prices. They talk about increase in demand. They talk about shortages in supply. But you know what they don't talk about? Printing money. Yeah. They don't talk about the fact that they printed money. They decided to print the money. Did it go out for a vote? Did you vote, Neil, for how many pounds you wanted printed? Right? Yeah. No one decides on this. They single-handedly do. And that is the biggest, dirtiest secret they don't want anyone to know. Because the second you, me, and all of us figured out that all the money that we're doing, all the work that we're putting in can be redetermined on Friday when you get your paycheck by what these dudes did on Monday. Like your entire week's worth can vanish. Your entire life savings can vanish over some of the decisions these people are making. And they don't want you to know that. They want you to just live about your life, worry about 2% inflation, and don't worry, things will be 2% more expensive. But wait, houses are going up much faster than 2%. Don't worry, Neil. Don't worry. Those are the evil international speculators. We'll deal with them. You just come showing up to work, keep doing your thing, keep doing what we tell you to do, and don't worry about it. We got this. Don't protect yourself, Neil. Don't sell those pounds for other things because we don't want you to do that. So be skeptical of everything you hear. They are not looking out for your best financial interests. They're looking out for theirs. And theirs is to stay in power and to keep you none the wiser.
And as you said, this isn't going down some conspiratorial rabbit hole here. You've lived and breathed this in Venezuela. You've seen what happens with the property prices, the business prices, the food prices, the banks. It's something that you've experienced. And I would urge anyone that's listening to this and not experienced it, you've got to walk a mile in somebody's shoes before you can comment. And I would urge anyone to, as you said, be curious, ask questions. Don't just take everything verbatim that's fed into the TV sets, etc. So I'm curious, if we look to the future, how do you envision the future of crypto lending, and how do you think it will evolve, and what role will you guys at Ledn play in shaping that future and solving some of the problems we're talking about?
Thank you. So I'm very optimistic in the future of digital assets. Of course, I'm biased. I have a business in this industry, but I see what it does. Like I see it day to day. I speak to people in Colombia, Venezuela, Brazil, and we can service clients all over the world, wherever we are, from our computers. We as a well-organized team, we can be in Toronto, but a lot of our team is in Canada. Some of us are in Europe, and some of us are in Cayman. But we are a global business that services clients all over the world. We service clients all over the world at the same rates, at the same interest rates. We charge people, regardless of where they are in the world, we charge them the same interest rates. They use the same collateral. They get the same disbursement times, the same processing times, same customer support quality. No other financial entity can say that, because banks and other companies or groups that provide financial services have systematically cut up the world into different boxes, and they offer their services in some places and others they cannot, because they're not running on the right technology. So for the first time ever, somebody anywhere in the world can post collateral to a company like Ledn in the Caymans and get a loan, regardless of where they are, as long as they pass KYC and they meet the requirements to interact with our platform. To me, borrowing against your Bitcoin and lending against Bitcoin is going to be faster, cheaper, and more efficient than lending or borrowing against your property. Why? Because Bitcoin is the same regardless all over the world. There's only very few properties in the planet that have property assurances where lenders are comfortable enough to lend, like the US, the UK, anyone in the world has Bitcoin. And Bitcoin can be placed as collateral and sold at any time, 24/7. It can be sold in fractions. If somebody partially defaults on a loan, I can't go and sell the living room of the house, right? Like I have to go and sell the full house.
Yeah.
Bitcoin is much better suited for asset-backed lending. And I believe that borrowing against Bitcoin is going to become, like I said, cheaper, faster, more efficient than borrowing against real estate. It's going to be exponentially more accessible. And it's going to revolutionize the world of asset-backed lending. Because imagine for a second, if anyone in the world could use their Bitcoin to get single-digit dollar funding to start a business, the world would be completely different. Because right now, there's such an uneven, we all know talent is unevenly distributed, right? And we also know that capital is unevenly distributed. By allowing capital to be more equally rebalanced or rebalanced faster and more efficiently, we can unlock a lot of that hidden talent around the world. So I'm hugely optimistic on the future of Bitcoin-backed lending and digital asset-backed lending. And the role that Ledn's going to play there is Ledn's going to be the absolute best place and the best experience for anyone with digital assets to borrow against them and get their financial services that they need. When people think, I want to get a loan, I want to earn passive income, I want to potentially get yield instruments that get the most out of my digital assets.
And before you came on the podcast today, I was also reading about how Ledn had launched DCNs and growth accounts too into the mix. So can you elaborate on these products and just tell me how they make Ledn stand out in this crowded crypto lending space? Because there's so many options there and knowing who to trust, who not to trust, etc. So I'm interested in how these new products will help you stand out further.
Yeah, happy to. So Ledn, one of the things that we do very differently is our transparency, right? Like we set the bar for transparency, and you don't have to take it from me. Go look at our reviews, go see what our clients have to say. But our two of our core pillars when it comes to transparency are proof of reserves, which we have a certified public accountant that comes every 6 months, looks at our client balances, looks at our assets, makes sure we have enough assets to cover our liabilities, produces a report that our clients can verify. The second one is our open book report. After what happened in 2022, people want to know how much of our assets are lent out, how are you paying me the yield that you're paying me, who is this thing going to, how much are you lending to each person or each group, and all of that is broken down month by month in a report we call the open book report. So our clients can see how we are lending their assets to generate yield and what percentage is being lent to each entity. They can see, we break down the rating of each entity in terms of who they are and try to give as much transparency of what these groups are, who these groups are and what they're doing with the money. And that's something that's very important. Why is that important? Because last year, you saw a lot of companies offering these yield products where they would take on assets and then would issue loans to institutions to get the yield that they would then pay back to their clients. What happened? Companies didn't manage risk. They were taking out people's assets and lending them to very risky counterparties that at times didn't even offer financial statements. They were just handshake agreements, and billions of dollars are being lent to these people by these bad actors. Why is Ledn so different? Because not only do we do all these transparency features that I told you about, we're incredibly strict and diligent on who we lend client assets to. There's a very small group of industry participants that we actually that we work with that are qualified to work with us. And even with all of that, what we also learned from the events of last year was that there is no lender of last resort in this industry. Therefore, the yield products have to be structured accordingly, right? You cannot be running these services with any type of deposit guarantees if there is no Federal Reserve on the back to help you guarantee those deposits. Because the way the Federal Reserve guarantees deposits is that they print it if it goes missing. Nobody can print additional Bitcoin, as I told you, right? Like that's one of the things, very key things about Bitcoin. So what does that mean? It means that our products have to be designed to match that. And what that means is we've ring-fenced our yield offerings, and we've ring-fenced them from each other because we have more than one. We have a yield offering for dollars, one for Bitcoin, one for Tether, and soon one for Ethereum. And those are all ring-fenced from each other and from our loan products and every other product. So what does that mean in normal people language? It means that if you give me Bitcoin to generate yield, you have to deposit that first on your transaction account, but then you have to move it to the growth account, which is where you earn the yield. And once it sits in the growth account, it's sitting in a different entity, separate and distinct from Ledn and from any other Ledn product. And why is that important? Because to get you the yield, I have to lend your Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And as great and as impeccable as Ledn's underwriting is, last year showed us that there could be fraud. There could be people that legitimately show you fraudulent information and lie to you and somehow are able to tick the boxes to get in. They're professional criminals, right? That's their business. So your system has to be able to absorb losses, right? And malperformance sustainably and keep going without it bringing down the entire operation as it did in 2022. So with the growth accounts, the people participating in the accounts are both participating in the benefits, so the yield that gets paid. And if there's ever an impairment of any of those loans, whatever percentage or portion of that impairment will get frozen from their balance. They'll still be able to withdraw everything else. And then anything that gets recovered from whatever was impaired will also get released as soon as that happens. But that is a much more elegant way of dealing with an impairment than to send the entire thing into bankruptcy and hold client asset hostages for 5 years, right? And so even in the worst cases, we are prepared to do this. We are prepared to basically sustain those events in the most time-proven way, because this is how traditional finance has been operating for hundreds of years. And the other one is in a sustainable way that allows you to continue with the least amount of disruptions to your day-to-day. And that's why our growth accounts are so unique, why they are becoming so popular. And the point I'll make about the DCNs, which is the other product you mentioned, is that it's a product that allows you to earn yield. And it's not, the way we pay you the yield is not related to lending. So the way the DCN works is, if you say it works with currency pairs. So right now the pairs are dollars to Bitcoin and Bitcoin to dollars. Dollars to Bitcoin means if Bitcoin's trading right now at 28, you could choose to sell Bitcoin at a higher price than it is today at a future point in time. So you can say, Mao, I want to put in an order to sell my Bitcoin at 30K at the end of October. And what that does, and it'll show you, okay, Neil, for this order, you're going to get an annualized APR of, say, 7%.
Yeah. And
what does that mean? It means that for the period between now and the end of October, you're going to get a yield payment that is going to be equivalent to you having earned 7% annualized for that period of 1 month. Why that's important is because at the end of October, if Bitcoin is at 30K or higher, you do not get your Bitcoin back. You get dollars. You get Bitcoin times 30K plus the yield payment. So you got to sell the Bitcoin at the price you wanted and the day that you wanted, and you got the additional yield, right? And the risk in this product, because I always like to talk about what is the trade-off, where the yield is coming from, is that you sold Bitcoin at 30 at the end of October, but Bitcoin could have been trading at 31 or 32. You're still going to sell at 30. It's as if you had been waiting to click and sell at 30, and you did it when it got there. It's no different. But just so you know, like that, the trade-off would be the potential foregone upside, additional upside that you could have gotten. So that's why that's where the yield comes from. And that's why Ledn is able to pay you a yield for taking on that contract, that position. So the opposite is also true for Bitcoin. You have dollars, you want to buy Bitcoin, you don't want to buy at 28, you want to buy it at 25. You set up your DCN to buy Bitcoin at 25 at the end of October. If Bitcoin is below 25, you don't get dollars, you get your Bitcoin at 25 like you wanted, and you get your yield. If Bitcoin is above 25, you just get your dollars back and your yield, and you get to try again for the next time, the next, maturity. So that's kind of how those two products work. They're very unique. They are unique to Ledn. No one else offers these. So I encourage anyone that could be interested from what I just said to go check them out, or even reach out to us if you have any questions, because I know they can be a bit complex if you want to get into the weeds.
And I'm curious, as digital currencies become more integrated into the more traditional financial systems, are there any particular challenges or equally opportunities that you foresee in the future, both for Ledn and the industry at large? Because it feels like things are really ramping up speed here.
Yes. So I see regulation as both a challenge and an opportunity. Yeah. I think that because this is becoming so adopted so fast, there can be fear from regulators because the technology is moving very fast and they have to kind of come to terms with it in a very kind of short time frame and pass what I believe needs to be fair regulation that allows this industry to grow. And I think that's a challenge for a government because they want to have to be open-minded and understand and talk to the right people and sort of move fast enough so not to kick companies away or stifle innovation. And it's an opportunity for those who understand this space and can move fast to really revolutionize their societies. And I'll give you the example of El Salvador. El Salvador is a great example. They've recognized this from early on. They made Bitcoin legal tender. When they made that decision, everybody ran out to sell their bonds and downgrade their bonds. Now the guys have repaid their bonds. Like El Salvador has fully repaid their bonds. Insane. And their numbers, they not only has their tourism shot up, Bukele has also been doing a lot of work on sort of gang organized crime. The murder rate in El Salvador is down to the lowest in Latin America. And the tourism is like the fastest growing tourism in the region.
Yeah. And
they are winning. It's like they are winning on every account, right? And I'll contrast that with a country like unfortunately or North America, right? Like without naming anyone in particular, North America has been pretty antagonistic so far this year. They've shut down the banks that facilitated that service this industry with seemingly no remorse whatsoever. They went in and they single-handedly shut down Signature, Silvergate, and they had no qualms to say that any buyer of Silvergate had to kick out all the crypto people. Canadian banks straight up shut down crypto companies' accounts and tell you we don't want to service you. Like just straight up, we don't want to service you. So they're really playing against this. And founders are doing what founders will do. They're going where they're welcome.
Yeah.
And I think that this is a tremendously missed opportunity. And so again, and look at how fast other jurisdictions are moving. On the back of the seeming mistakes of the North American regulators, you've had Hong Kong rush to put out a framework. The UAE put out a framework. France put out a framework. El Salvador put out a framework. Like everybody's trying to bring this industry into their jurisdiction. And somehow the North Americans and some of the Europeans are like, well, we don't know how to manage. They're just like, they're humming and hawing when everyone else is running to invite these companies, I find that hilarious.
Oh man, absolutely love it. And love chatting with you today. I've learned so much. And I'm curious because the world is moving at such a rapid rate at the moment. The pace of technological change is increasing speed as well. And there's a real pressure on each and every one of us to be in a state of continuous learning almost. So I've got to ask, how or where do you self-educate to stay on top of things, to improve yourself on a regular basis? How do you do that? What do you look at? Any advice for people listening?
Yes. So one of the things I found is very helpful is, a couple of years back, I started writing the research letter at Ledn.
Yeah.
And every 2 weeks, I have to do a deep dive on a particular topic or subject to share with our audience. And it's at first it felt a bit, I write about things that I enjoy. And because when you write something, you have to put it out for the world to see and critique and understand and hopefully find value in. So it forces you, when you're doing things on your own, and you're trying to learn something, you read it and you'll be like, oh, I don't get it. And you might get bored and you put down the book and you just kind of keep going about your day. But when you have to publish by Tuesday and you have to get it figured out, it creates this sort of fire for you to figure it out and for you to be able to put it into plain language. And if you're not able to do that, your own ego or your self-conscious is going to say, this isn't good enough to put out, right? Like you need to spend a bit more time on this. And so challenging yourself to putting stuff out there in public, forces you to be sharper, and it forces you to get feedback that many times, you didn't expect, but it makes you better, right? Like the only way you get better is by getting other people's feedback, right? Like, if you want to get better in the eyes of the world, you have to get the world's feedback. If you want to get better in the eyes of yourself, then yes, fine, self-critique yourself all day long. But, that's not going to really get you, depends on what your outcome is, right? If you want people to listen, if you want people to read about what you have to say, you have to be able to put it out there and be willing to take the criticism so that you can get better.
Wow, what a fantastic answer. Like I said, I've learned so much from you today, and we've only still just scratched the surface. So for anybody listening, wanting to dig a little bit deeper, find out more about the technical aspects, how they can get involved, contact your team, join your community, where would you point everyone listening to?
Yeah, we're very active on Twitter. At Hodl with Ledn is our handle for Ledn. Mine is Cryptonomist with an A at the end, so Cryptonomista. And you can follow our blog that I just mentioned at blog.ledn.io. You can subscribe. It's called The Weekly Hodl. I biased, but I strongly suggest it. Write it with a lot of love every 2 weeks. And we're also pretty active now on Instagram and other social media, depending on which one you prefer. Most of the content is pretty similar on both networks. Twitter can be a bit more technical. Instagram can be a bit more personal and relatable. Depends on what kind of content you'd like. But yeah, I suggest you check out both.
Well, we covered so much today, talking about your powerful origin story, how you use Bitcoin to escape Venezuela's economic collapse. And again, for any journalist listening, writing a Bitcoin obituary, I would ask them to listen to what you said there. And how would you send US dollars to, or how would you send money to somebody in Venezuela before actually writing that? And also some of the lessons you learned from hyperinflation, how to protect one's assets, and also the future of crypto lending and some of your new products there, from DCNs to growth accounts. So much we covered. I hope anybody listening that's interested in this will reach out and contact you. But more than anything, just thank you for sharing that powerful story with me today.
It was my pleasure, Neil. Thanks for having me.
First of all, a big apology if you're hearing any sniffles, sneezes or coughs during that interview. I am doing my best to stifle the dreaded case of man flu at the moment. But what a captivating and enlightening discussion that was. A huge thank you to Mauricio for not only joining me today, but sharing those invaluable insights, because I think his narrative presents a very powerful case study for the potential that cryptocurrencies can hold, not just as a speculative investment, but think bigger than that, as a fundamental instrument for socio-economic stability and transformation. And yes, there is a lot of rigorous work that still needs to be done building trust within the crypto landscape, but let's keep this discussion going, because the more perspectives we have, the richer our understanding will be. So email me, techblogoutlook.com, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, at Neil C. Hughes, if you'd like to talk with me, if you'd like to come on the podcast, whatever it is, I'm the easiest guy in the world to find. But now I'm going to have a lemsip, blow my nose and have a lie down for a few minutes. But I will be back bright and early tomorrow, hopefully feeling a little bit better. But thanks for listening as always. And until next time, don't be a stranger.